Welcome to the House Sitters Field Notes, a conversation series with Harvesting Ease with JRC, where we sit down with real house sitters to talk about what this lifestyle actually looks like in the field. Not the fantasy, not the pretty travel photos, but the real stories, the lessons, the learning curves, the pet care, the trust building, the communication, the surprises, and the wisdom that comes from living in other people's homes and caring for their animals. So, if you're new to Trusted House Sitters, curious about house sitting, or wondering whether this could become part of your own travel life, these conversations are here to help you learn from people who have actually done it. Today, I am so excited to welcome Miss V, also known as the Travel Misses. Miss V brings such a thoughtful and generous perspective to travel, house sitting, and what it means to step into someone else's home with respect and care. In today's conversation, we'll talk about her first trusted house sitters experience, what she's learned from the field, what surprised her, and what helped her build confidence. And of course, what tips she recommends for first time sitters who are just getting started. So, whether you're listening from YouTube, watching inside one of my Skool communities, or just dreaming about what your first sit could look like, I hope this conversation gives you practical insight, some encouragement, and a clearer sense of what is possible. Miss V, welcome to the House Sitter Field Notes. I would love to start with you introducing yourself in your own words. Tell us who you are, where you are in the world, and what first drew you towards house sitting and the Trusted Sitters community.
Yeah, for sure. So, like you mentioned, I am Miss V. I go online by the Travel Misses, but I am Miss V, and I absolutely love traveling. And so, I think one way to really introduce this is my very first travel. My very first international travel was the first time flying, the first time everything for me, and I ended up going to Santiago, Chile. And so, while I was there, I was attending an immersion program, which is where you will learn the language in the morning, and then in the afternoon, you would go to the mall or do like horseback racing, not racing, horseback riding, or just different activities, right? Different sightseeing, go to the markets to practice what you've learned in the language school. And while I was in my immersion program, I was living with 2 families, 2 host families. So 2 local families, and, they bring you into their home, you have your own room, and they cook for you and things like that, and it's a way to help your language learning improve as well because your host families are not gonna be speaking English with you. And so that was my first introduction to traveling and being abroad and living with a host family. So then that's when the travel bug bit me. And I said, I absolutely love this travel thing. Where else can I go? So I went to Egypt and I had different kind of accommodations there. Overnight on a train, overnight on a felucca, overnight at a hotel, and I've lived in hostels. I've stayed in, of course, hotels. I've stayed in Airbnbs. And then after a while, as you're traveling, you get to realize, you know what? It's going to be the most expense when it comes to the accommodations. And so, how can I continue to travel without paying all this money for accommodations? And so that's when I started looking for opportunities, and I first came across working for your accommodation. So you can work at a hostel. You can work at a hostel, or you can do something for a hotel or something, and they'll house you. Or you can work for your room, work for your bed. But then when I began to further research, I said, oh, I came across Stephanie Perry from Exodus Summit, and she was talking about house sitting. I said, well, I could work for this, but what about house sitting? Because I love dogs, right? And so I listened to what she had to say about it, and I applied for my first house sit. Basically, she had a template I could use. I applied for my first house sit, and I got that house sit. And so now, it's something that I look forward to whenever I'm traveling. I'll say, I wonder, is there a house sit in that area? And so that's how I got started house sitting. Um, Another little tidbit is right now I'm in North Carolina, but I actually plan on moving to Mexico. And in moving to Mexico, I'm definitely going to be taking advantage of house sitting for long-term stay. Because imagine living in Mexico and you don't have to pay no rent. You don't have to pay for somebody's mortgage. All right. You don't have to pay any of that. You just walk their dogs. And well, that's what I'm interested in. You can do dogs, cats, lizards, whatever. But so that's how I got started.
Thank you for sharing your origin story. And we love Stephanie Perry over here, right?
Mhm,
This is, we
for
give her
sure.
all the credit. So, thinking back to that very first sit that you had, what fears or hesitations did you have before the first sit?
Well, when you're doing something for the first time, it could cause some hesitations because you don't know if you're gonna get along with the owners. You don't know if you're gonna get along well with the pets or if they're gonna, take well to you. And you don't know what if an emergency comes up, you don't know what to do in emergency, and you don't want their anything to happen to their pet while in your care and it becomes your fault or something like this. So all of these are like fears or hesitations, but you can balance that out, with your interview and making sure that, the host is going to have some instructions for you. All of this will be worked out, but it's definitely, if it's your first time, you're definitely going to have these questions and hesitations because it's your first time. So you really don't know what you're getting into.
Right. That's why we want people to come into the school so that we can tell them, hey, here's a checklist. Here's a list of questions that you can ask. So what was that first sit like? So you ideally you want to be able to in the interview ask these questions about your fear around your fears and your hesitations and get the contingency plans and understand who's the emergency contact or where the vet is. But what was your first sit like?
So, my first sit was a local sit. I said, okay, it's my first time doing it. So I don't want to go abroad and do it. I'd rather be right here at home, close to home. And so I found a local sit. And it also helps to know what you like. Do you want to be by the beach? Do you want to be in the city? For me, I knew I wanted to be in the city. And so I found a place in uptown Charlotte. It gave me that perfect city life. Okay. It was close to the Spectrum Center where the Charlotte Hornets play, and close to the Bank of America Stadium where the Carolina Panthers play. So that was perfect for me. And so it was a local sit. Uh, that sit was something that it kind of taught me what to ask for. It was my
Mhm.
first experience. So I learned now, okay, this being my first experience, now I know what to ask for. Um, but the owner and we got along well. She took me on the route that she normally takes her pets when walking, and she told me like their favorite spots. And so that
Great.
went well. I did end up getting along well with the pets, and I ended up learning that I really love Dobermans. I didn't think I would love a Doberman that well, but I learned that I love Dobermans. So I'm not a small dog kind of girl. I like big dogs,
That's
and
right.
so I really did like that Doberman. So that was something I learned as well. So the house it ended up going well. There was no emergencies. There wasn't anything that came up that I wasn't really expecting. So it went well. That was my first experience, and it was good enough to have me want to continue.
Awesome. Glad to hear that. So it's really smart that you arrived early and had enough time of overlap with the host to go on the actual dog walks. That's a great tip.
Mhm.
Thinking now, thinking back, was there anything that you wish you would have known before your first sit? Is there anything that you wish? I'm great. I'm glad that it went well, but was there anything that you wish you would have known ahead of time?
Well, yes. So I wish for me, I wish I would have known that me as someone that's applying to a house that I can actually ask questions. I don't have to be so accepting. Sometimes just like, when you're applying for a job or you want to get the job, you may not want to be too heavy on the questions because you really want the job, but you don't want to approach this in a sense of being desperate for it. If it's not a good fit, you need to know that. And sometimes when you read the application or read the sit, there's some things that are missing and you have to ask about it. And um, so I wish I would have known that, hey, Verna, you just don't have to say yes to everything. You can ask questions. There are more sits out here. You can ask questions. You can keep looking, and you don't have to say yes right away. That's another thing. I thought I had to, hurry up and seal this deal now. you don't have to do that. You can let them know that you wanna sleep on it a night or 2.
That's
So
great.
those are things I wish I would have known before going into it.
That's really going to be very helpful for our first time sitters. What mistakes do you think that beginners commonly make?
The mistake that I made, which was not asking questions. So, I remember this one time, it made me feel a bit funny. I remember I was in the sit and I was preparing, and this was after the owner had gone. It was just me and the dogs now, and I was preparing to take them for a walk. And I remember, getting their collars together and things like that. And I happened to look down at the shoe mat. Now, it was in my opinion that this lady was living by herself. But I looked at the shoe mat and there was some big old shoes, like these big man boots. And I was like, now wait a minute, is a man gonna be coming here? Like, do they know that I'm here? So it brings up these kind of questions like, what's happening here? I thought you were by yourself. I didn't know there was somebody else. And if it is somebody else, do they know I'm here? Are they gonna pop up? Do they have a key? What about it? So these are things that you definitely want to ask questions because that was a detail that was left out in the application because I was under the impression it was by herself, and maybe she was. Maybe that's just somebody that stayed over every once in a while, but you don't know until you ask questions. So the mistake is, not asking questions, not doing research on that area, and so, you wanna be sure that when you apply to a sit, you're gonna like the area. If you want it to be walkable, be sure ahead of time, whether you're researching it on your own or asking the host, is it walkable? What's close? How many minutes to, I don't know, the pharmacy, the grocery store, things like that. So you do wanna research the area and, and and you just wanna just not be scared to ask questions because I didn't do that, and I wish I did.
That's great tips. That's really important. It's not just a one-way interview, right?
There you go.
And you can give yourself some space to think about it and let your body tell you, do I want to do this? Is it an enthusiastic yes? And if not, if the answer is no, it's not an enthusiastic yes, then it's a no. And that's fine. You move on to the next sit. So I really appreciate you sharing more of the questions that you always ask homeowners before accepting a sit and the type of information you like to have before you start the sit or before you say yes. Curious to know, have you ever had to renegotiate any expectations before or during your sits?
Let's see. I didn't have to renegotiate really. Okay, so let me share an experience. So, one experience was that when my sit was over, the owner asked me if I was comfortable with staying an extra day because during the interview, I let her know that this was on my vacation and I have a week of vacation, but the sit wasn't for a whole week. The sit was like maybe for 3 nights or so. And she knew that I was on a week's vacation, so she wanted to know if if I was able or willing to do an extra day. And because I didn't have anything to do, I said, well, the dogs aren't bad. Yes, I'll do an extra day. But I will say that, when things like this come up, don't be scared to say no. Because just because you have a week vacation doesn't mean you want to spend majority of your week's vacation with these dogs. Maybe it's just an experience for you, or maybe you're just trying out for the first time. And so don't feel like you have to hurry and say yes to please the owners. If you have fulfilled your obligation already and this is just something extra, you can say no to it. That's not what you agreed to ahead of time. You can say no to it. Um, I will also say that a few of the questions that you may want to ask before even taking that sit is the temperament of the dogs. Is it's a difference in sitting a young dog that has so much energy and ready to do all the things versus sitting an older dog that's just I'll walk for 15 minutes and I'm gonna sit down.
Mhm.
So the temperament of your dog. Also, cameras is a thing. I wish I would have asked about cameras because I remember this is after the owner left. I remember being in the home, not asking about the camera, never asked about a camera. But it was one night I was gonna sit on the couch, watch a TV show with the dogs, and I happened to see, and it wasn't hidden, I just overlooked it, and I happened to see this camera staring at me in the living room, and it was on. It had a little green light, by the lens, and it was on. And I said, "Dad, I had no idea that this camera was here." And it wasn't, I mean, it was in the living room, so I wasn't gonna be the most indecent in the living room, but I just wish I would have known at least ahead of time that it was gonna be a camera there. So I ended up finding out midway. And I mentioned it, I didn't like run her down in the comments, but I mentioned like, hey, if you guys are, curious to know if there's cameras here, there's something you want to ask. So I put that in my feedback after the sit. But that's one thing I really wish I would have asked is cameras. So there are things you can ask about, but I didn't have to renegotiate necessarily, but I did agree to an extra stay, which is nothing that someone has to do. If it fits for you, fine. But if you have to wiggle it and try to make it work and do the most to accommodate, just say no. You're not obligated.
That's good advice. Center yourself and your own plans. For oftentimes, so I do my international house sittings, and I will have like the longer sits anchor what I'm doing, where I'm staying, and I'll usually give myself a few buffer days before and after, especially if it's a new location. I like to arrive early, do my tourist thing before my sit starts. So maybe I'll do 7 days, in Oaxaca proper, and then go start the sit. Um, and then if I like the host, if I feel like they were kind and generous to me, and they say, "Oh my God, Jay, our flight is delayed," or "Can you stay an extra day?" I'll say yes. But if I don't like them, to be honest, I'm gonna move on with my plans. I'm not going to, and so I really appreciate that you're, centering what your own needs are, that this is not a job, where you are waiting for some kind of review. And you also mentioned the reviews. Can you talk a little bit more about how we can use our reviews after a sit has ended, right, to rate, right, giving a star system, rate the host and the animals and the house, but also how do you use reviews before when you're selecting or applying for a sit? Tell us more about your reviews.
Yeah, so when it comes to the reviews, I do like to look over the reviews first, for sure. I want to know, are people leaving 5 stars? And if they're not leaving 5 stars, I want to know why, because maybe for someone that left a 3 star simply because there was a camera, okay, but if I'm okay with cameras, then that's fine. I don't care about that. But so I want to know the stars, and if you give less than 5 stars, I want to know why, because your reasoning could be different than my reason. So that's one thing. Also, sometimes i- it's just normal that in this space, sometimes the host will not put everything in the application. And so when sitters go to sit, they may be hit with some surprises. And these surprises is what sitters tend to put in their reviews. And so in this case, um, for example, there was a sit that I turned down once because the dog was a sick dog and needed to have medicine administered. And I've never done that before. I didn't want to mess it up. I didn't want to get the wrong schedule and all the things. But what if I didn't know that? And
Yeah,
so if I would have gone on that sit and didn't know it, then I would have been bombarded with a lot of responsibility that I didn't want to do. And so I tend to look for that also in the reviews. And so I because I was hit with the camera and didn't know it, I want other people to know, hey, if you are concerned about a camera, you need to ask about it, okay, because there was a camera. Um, and then the same for me when I look at other people's reviews, if they left the review saying that something popped up they didn't know about it, I am very particular about that. I need to know what's happening. And so using those reviews can keep you from getting into a sit that you are uncomfortable with that you really don't want to take part in.
great points. Great points. So I like to, in my interview, ask questions about things that are questionable in their previous sitters' reviews, and give them a chance to respond. Hey, I noticed that the last person who cared for your home and your pets said XYZ, you know, um, what's your side of the story? And give them a chance to respond. I also ask, here's my standard question is, are there any cameras inside or outside the home that you'd like to disclose? And I just leave some space for them to answer that question. Um, Sometimes I've gotten, yes, there's some internal cameras. Feel free to unplug them or turn them around or put a cloth over them. One time a family was like, "Oh yeah, we have one in the living room," just like you said,
Mhm.
and they were totally amenable to me just unplugging them while I lived in the space. Other times, "Oh, we have outward facing security cameras, they're motion activated, they'll let me know." Or, "Well, yeah, we have some cameras, but they're actually not plugged in. It looks like they're there." So, it's just interesting to ask the question. Another question, like when you mentioned the animal asking about the animal's temperament, I find asking the question, are there any regions on their bodies that they don't want to be touched? Are they aggressive or territorial on any parts of their bodies, any toys, or at meal times? Like sometimes you have to really pull information out of the host because they adore their animals and they want to speak highly about their animals. And sometimes they forget that you're asking another human to come in, and we don't always know the quirks. So being very specific about the temperament, what the environment is going to look like. And, as a Black woman who's been doing this is my 25th sit that I'm currently on. I always ask, have you let your neighbors know that there's going to be a Black woman living in your home and caring for your animals? And I let some space. Feel free, and I can text you a WhatsApp picture of me so that you could share that in your community if you think it's important, so that everybody's aware that I belong, and it cuts down on any uncomfortable microaggressions or surveillance that might happen, um, especially as we're traveling and crossing borders. So I want to ask you the next question about what should international sitters know before crossing borders? You've got a lot of experience in traveling.
Yes. So international. So one thing is going to be about visas. Sometimes you can do visa on arrival. Other times you may need to do visa ahead of time. I remember when I went to Egypt, it was visa on arrival. So I got there, there was a kiosk. They stamped the visa in my passport and I was good to go. When I went to Bali, I had to actually uh, go online, pay for my visa online before going to Bali. So one of the things that's definitely going to be visas. When you get to where you're going, you want to be able to be in that country legally with the correct paperwork. And then there's countries like I remember going to Chile. I just needed to show up my passport, and that was okay. Um, or sometimes things change. I did that one time in London, but the next time I went to London, I had to get what's called an ETA. And so I had to pay for that to allow me in the country. Once you get it and pay for it, it's good for 2 years. But these are just things that, especially with international trips, that you want to be careful about is your visas. Um, Also, culture. When you're coming into another country and you have your own ideas and cultural experiences, know that it may be different where you're going. So, for example, if you guys have peeped the Mexico flag in my background, I will be moving to Mexico. And something that I need to know is that the culture differences. And so, um, a lot of the times, and I've experienced this myself, even with making like doctor's appointments in Mexico, is that they don't move on the time that you may be used to. If you want something done right away, get to me, uh, super prompt, and you go to Mexico, you can be pulling your hair out because it just don't work that way in Mexico. And so, if you're going to be having a house sit in another country, you need to research what that culture is like before you get there to see if you are going to be able to be okay in that country. So if you're in Mexico and you're impatient, that's not going to be the country for you for sure. So visas, learning the culture and the language as well. Um, Language, hellos and goodbyes. Okay, so your greetings and farewells, your pleasantries, a few nouns, a few verbs. You don't have to know all of it, but learn a little something because they take that as being respectful. So you also, when it comes to going to other countries, you want to learn the language to show that you are being respectful. So these are the tips that I'll give about traveling, going to other countries, international trips.
Understanding their relationship with time, really important. It'll help you calm yourself
For
and
sure.
accept, the flow. And there's a beauty in that. So you've done a lot of traveling. How has house sitting in particular changed the way that you think about traveling?
I tell you what, Uh, if you give me just a moment, I'm gonna be
Mhm.
right back. I'm gonna answer that question
All
for you.
all right.
So with house sitting and traveling, what I absolutely love, and I'm gonna plug up my computer right here. What I absolutely love is that number one, I love travel. And house sitting lets me travel and it takes away the biggest expense. house sitting is something that gives me freedom, right? Because if you can do this anywhere around the world, all right, that gives you freedom on traveling anywhere. The less money that you have to spend, it gives you freedom on the things that you can do in that country. So if I don't have to spend that much on accommodations, then I can go to the cenotes, right? Then I can go on the tours. Then I can go um, on the things that come with travel, all the touristy things, like the Bali swing or swimming with the dolphins or something. I don't know, but you can do these things if you don't have that huge expense of the accommodation. So
Mhm.
that is how house sitting has changed my view when it comes to traveling. Travel more on less of a dime, and you can have more experiences, versus having to spend all of that money in accommodation.
Well said. And last
Mhm.
question, what kind of person do you think house sitting is especially good for?
You have to be responsible. Okay, if you are the type of person that you're wishy-washy. I was gonna do it, but then something came up and I can't do it anymore. Or if you're not considerate of others, if you are, because the thing is, these people are depending on you to care for their pets or their plants or their home, whatever the case. And so if you neglect that, why would you even do that? Why would you even sign up for it to begin with? So you do need to be responsible for sure. Also, I would say that responsible people and those people that are flexible, because again, depending on where you're sitting, there's different cultures. Also, when you are house sitting, they have different hosts. So, then different hosts may have their different requirements. Like, for example, my host asked me if I could spend an extra day. For me, it was okay because,
Yeah.
but are you flexible with that? Are you flexible with even the host saying that, oh, you know what? I thought we were going to be out today. It turns out we're not going to be out for another couple of days. I do want to say that when you are a trusted house sitter, there are some insurances that will cover some of these things.
Mhm.
But being flexible and adaptable does help. Let's see. And be an animal lover. If you are going to pet sit. You need to actually like pets. So if you're gonna say, "Ugh, pet hair," and "Ugh," don't pet sit if you don't like pets. So for me, I love dogs. In fact, I found out again about my Doberman. I absolutely love a Doberman now, and I love big dogs. But I really don't care for the lizards or for the snakes. So I wouldn't sign up for that kind of pet sit. So whatever you're going to sit, be sure that you actually do like that particular animal. If you're not a cat person, don't go messing with no cats. Okay, so be an animal lover or be a lover of whatever it is that you're sitting. Horse lover, reptile, I don't know, guinea pig. Be that lover if you're going to sit for it, because you don't want a miserable sit, and you also don't want to mistreat anything because you just don't like it.
Yes. Thank you so much, Miss V. I'm so grateful. Thank you for your honesty, right? And for stating the obvious as well, because it goes without saying, right? Thank you for the care that you're bringing to being a trusted house sitter and your travel lifestyle. And to everyone watching, thank you for being here. I hope that this conversation gave you some encouraging words as you explore what's possible through house sitting. And be sure to follow along and join us inside of our Skool community if you're ready to learn more about how to begin as a traveler or as a sitter, and to do these things with more confidence and ease. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. Talk to y'all later.